I'm going to talk to you a little bit and do a little bit of housekeeping and follow up before we get into what I'm going to talk about. On the safety issue, I want to bring that up again a little bit. I might have come down a little bit hard. I'm not sorry for it because of the gravity of it. Companies that I've worked with, if you committed a safety violation, you'd be written up, okay? Not out of meanness, but out of a desire to correct that action so that you wouldn't do it again. But on the other hand, if you bypassed a safety feature, you might as well hand in your badge and walk out the door because there was no explaining anything. You were just done. Safety is taken that serious for one reason. When somebody has an accident, an incident, it entails one, the person is hurt. My view was you came in with 10 toes and 10 fingers. I want you to walk out the door with 10 toes and 10 fingers. If you don't, there's a problem. One, it causes a lot of paperwork. Trust me, I know. Number two, it causes financial issues. Workman's comp can go up. The costs associated with it are pretty good. And third, if it is a serious issue, and OSHA is brought in to do an investigation, their view is, well, you had a deficiency here that caused an accident. We're not going to just look at this. They keep their eyes wide open and look elsewhere also while they're in the area, in the plant. So, if you know manufacturing, that's one of the last things you want is OSHA snooping around your area. Enough about that. We're going to start getting into some stuff. I don't know about you, but I've seen on the internet people talking about the Featherweight. And I've even seen one person say that they've sewn saddle leather with it. Kind of made me chuckle a little bit. This was the sample that was sent to me with one of my sewing machines. It's about 1.5 inches of veg tan leather, which is saddle leather. That's a very big machine too, and heavy duty. When they say it'll sew through saddle leather, they're stretching it a lot. The Featherweight's a great machine, but it is light duty. It may sew through chrome tan, which is a different process, and garment material. Again, also a different type of leather. So let's start with what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk today about paint application methods. I did show you how to prep the machine. I have a few photos of me actually doing it. And I know that I said I wasn't going to do a video, that I just wanted to do kind of a blog. Only problem that I found was as I was thinking about this preparing, there was no way that I could put in written form and pictures adequately a way so you could understand it, fairly well and see why it's important. That's the reason that I chose a video, okay? We're going to look at different application methods and tools. We're going to start with the first, which may be the most common and people are familiar with. I call it a rattle can. This, can work. Auto body shops, they will put you know, the paint, reduce it, and put it into one of these cans for you to use. And that's fine. But the only problem with a Rattle can, you're limited in your adjustability. You've got a finger, on, off. And the spray pattern is a circle. And the only way that you can control the volume of material that is put on your object, the featherweight, is by the amount of time that it takes you to cover the item, or the times that you, or layers that you put on. Second, this is very hard to control, and generally you get too much material on the item. Using this, you'll see people say, man, I got runs, or I got this. Again, application method. Can you get away with it for primer? Yeah, you can. Is it the best method? Absolutely not. We're going to look at different methods, and in my opinion, we're going to go from the worst, which we just saw, all the way to what I consider the best. This is the next item. It's a spray gun. Will it work? Sure. Is it the most efficient? Absolutely not. One advantage with this, though, is that you have air volume adjustment. You have paint volume adjustment up here. And then you have the trigger on, off, and a little bit of control. Much better than a can, obviously. You also have a tip. And with this tip, you will see that it's built much differently than that can. And this gives it a much better spray pattern and quality of finish. And this is what the old-time bodymen used to use, and some still do. You'll see that the orientation is horizontal, and there's a reason for that. If you look at the holes here, that is where air comes out, and it helps form the spray pattern. The inner holes here on the outside of that needle are what they call atomizing holes. It helps take the liquid that is coming through the gun and atomize it, or mix it with air, and that allows it to become a mist that you use and reach the product and lay down paint, primer, whatever. The center is the needle, and that is really the control, because the more you pull back, the more gap you're leaving on the needle. So in a way, that is a volume control. You know, they've been using it. It does work. Now, I'm going to go over, you know, some of the advantages and disadvantages of this. Some of the advantages of this type setup is the cost. You can get these fairly cheap and they work. You can go all the way up to the professional grade, more expensive, better quality. But the principle is still the same. You've got a paint canister or paint can on the bottom. You've got a tube going in. The paint is drawn up by siphon action through and out the tip of the gun and atomized. One of the things that I don't like there we go about this method, you will see the tube that comes down. If I hold this up, you will see the positioning of that tube. To get this system to work right, you've got to have a fairly decent volume of material in the can. And with a small featherweight, are you going to use all that material? No. So what do you do with the rest of it? Do you put it in a jar and try to save it? You could do that with the primer, possibly even with some of the base coat, but definitely not with a clear coat if you use a catalyzer, because once it's mixed in, you've got a certain amount of time before that material hardens and crystallizes and becomes useless. Ask me how I know about paint lines when they catalyze their delivery lines. One other item with this, it's the most inefficient. You get between 30 and roughly 40% of the material that comes out of the gun that actually hits the item. And you have a big spray pattern. So when you have a small item and you're painting it, where is the rest of the material going? It's just going into the air and it's doing absolutely nothing. I'm also going to mention, well, I'll get to that later, forget it. So we've talked about the Siphon spray gun. Now we're going to look at a little bit of a smaller, same principle gun, but what they call a touch-up gun. It may look different, but all the features are still there that are in the other gun. You have your air adjustment, you have your paint volume adjustment here, you have your trigger, the setup of the nozzle tip is still the same, the orientation's still the same, and you still have your paint can. Let's see if I can do this. I guess not. I haven't taken it apart in so long that it's pretty stiff. But you still run into the same problem with this as you do the big gun. You have a larger volume of material, and you have to have it in there to be siphoned up. Third, we're going to look at what they call an HVLP spray gun. It's an evolution of the other spray guns. It has the same features. You've got your air adjustment, you've got your volume adjustment, and the tip is set up just a little differently. You don't have the atomizing holes. And as you can see, instead of having a can sitting at the bottom, you've got a container on top. This is called a gravity feed gun. This one is better. I believe it's up around 40 to 50% efficient with the paint reaching the product. Better, but there are trade-offs with this. It takes lower pressure, but it takes more air to do the same thing. So you've got to have a bigger reservoir of air to use this gun. Now we're going to come to my favorite, which is the Airbrush. It's designed a little bit different. You can see the size of it is a lot smaller. Basic principle is the same as the other guns, but the application of it is a little bit different. The nozzle is still drawn by Siphon, but it's a different. You still have the needle, you still have the orifice for the paint to flow out. One thing I like about this gun, and they make two models of airbrushes. One is called a single action and another is called a dual action. This is what they call a dual action. The benefits to it, in my opinion, when you push down on the button, you're releasing air. When you push down, or actually you could pull back, you're opening the orifice for the needle and you are allowing more paint out the farther you pull back. If you're not pressing down for air, you could pull it back and it won't do anything because it's not going to siphon the paint out. So one of the advantages of this method is when I first take a piece and put my first layer of primer on, I will push down, pull back just a little bit. I want a fine mist to lay down on that part for the first layer. The purpose for that is when the paint atomizes, you almost want it dry when it hits the product, okay? And you don't want a whole lot of it. The reason for that is when the material hits the paint hits the object, if it is light, not much, and it's almost dry, it'll adhere, but it's going to leave a rougher surface. So you won't really be able to see it, but it's there. And with that rougher surface, it allows you to apply more primer and build up your coats, and you have better adhesion. That's the whole purpose for the light first coat. Now we're going to get into application. You have your gun. Oh, before that, let's back up a little bit. We've talked about the guns. We're going to talk a little bit about the compressor. Okay? Hobbyist compressor has a tank reservoir that will allow you to have a little bit more capacity, a little bit more consistency of the pressure when it comes out, because the piston, this is a pistonless, but oilless, I'm sorry. When it activates and starts building pressure, you've got some here, so you don't have those highs and lows like a hobby compressor without a tank and you try to use it. One of the things that you'll notice on this is a water separator and a gauge. If you turn the top of the water separator, it's a regulator also. You control how much pressure is going out the other side to your paint airbrush in my case. So I can regulate that amount. And that's pretty important because you don't want your pressure going up and down. Also, you definitely don't want water or oil in your lines and mixed with your paint. It just doesn't work. It's like mixing water and oil. You know, same thing. When I use this compressor, the only thing it's used for is my airbrush. That's it. In automotive or other professional applications, when they have a paint area, you will find most of the time they have a special compressor that is set up that a lot of times it's a screw drive compressor, and they're big, and they have a large reservoir to give you that volume. They have water separators and oil separators in them. So they're trying to limit the output of either one of those because the water is just a byproduct of compressing air. It happens. The oil, a lot of compressors that you see, they have to oil the moving parts. So you may get a little bit of oil coming through with your air. And it goes so far as a painting, and I'm going to use auto body, they will have separate air hoses and lines that come into their area that are specifically for air gun use. If they're using air tools, and they can use those lines with power tools too. I mean, so it's not really an issue. But if you have, let's say a mechanic shop with it, they may have a different compressor, less expensive, and they may even have a device that puts a little bit of oil in the line. Purpose for that is air tools need to be lubricated. You might even see a mechanic take a little tiny bottle, flip his gun over, and drop a drop of oil into his air tool to keep it lubricated and running properly. So you won't see a mechanic taking his air hose and giving it to a body man to hook up and use to paint. It just doesn't happen. They even make different colors of air hoses. A red air hose, can be used in the mechanic side. A blue air hose or something they may use in the body side, but they want to be able to differentiate between the hoses. We're going to talk a little bit about spray pattern. Why is that important? You want to know and optimize how that material is mixing with the air and how it is forming, so that you know what's happening when it hits the material. With one of these guns set up in this horizontal orientation, you're going to get a vertical spray pattern, elliptical. So, it's going to be here and then you spray. If you flip these ears vertical, it's going to give you a horizontal spray pattern, and you paint like this, because if you painted like this, you'd be applying a whole lot of paint to a small area. When the paint and air atomizes it, it comes out, and that pattern is called a cone of spray. And just picture this is the gun, my hands are the spray pattern. It's going to come out like that. You will see, even if you go to a body shop, a lot of times you may see on their wall little blotches of paint, different colors, because what they will do a lot of times is take the gun, put the paint in, look at it, adjust everything by eye as the spray pattern, and then they're going to walk up to a wall or something and do a quick spray pattern test. That's just to confirm that everything is working properly and set right. With an airbrush, and I'm going to use this as the example because this is what I'm using, and we're going to go into the reasons why I use it as we talk. One, it's small, easily maneuverable, inexpensive. The cone of spray is much smaller. That allows more of the material to hit the featherweight and not go in the air. So there's less waste, so it's more efficient. But there are, believe it or not, specific ways you need to paint. And by that I'm meaning the movements of your arm and how you're doing it. I'm going to use a bed extension as an example. And if you can see my hand, I'm going to take my finger, you see where it is in relation to the plate? At that point, I'm going to push down on the air, pull back on a little bit of paint, because I want to form the spray cone. Then I'm going to come over the machine. Once I'm off a little bit, that's when I'm going to release and stop the spray. Technically, at that point, you would come down a little bit, pull back, start spraying back across. With the spray process, let's say you covered this much area with your first pass. You're going to come down, overlap that first pass by about 50% and spray again. Let's say you just make your pass here, come down, spray here, and spray here. You're going to be able to see, differences in the way the paint is layered down. So you're going to see kind of lines because you may have a thicker coat here, a thinner coat, thicker coat. It does make a difference. Also, when you're spraying, this is the plate and the surface. When you're spraying, you want the gun to be 90 degrees from the object. Reason for that is, let's say, and I'm going to use the object because it's easier than my arm. Let's say you're painting and your object or your gun is tilted. Well, you've got this portion closer to the gun. What's going to happen? You're going to get a heavier amount of material here and a lighter amount up here. So that's why you'll see people making sure their movements are perpendicular to the object that's being painted. Another tip, when you're painting, you're perpendicular, but one of the last things you want to do is spray. Once you get closer to the end, just flip your wrist out. Or start here, have your wrist flip this way and come down and flip it out at the end. When you do that, you're causing an uneven application of the paint, and it can have negative effects. When you're painting, let's go into a little bit of the prep before, because I kind of covered it, but I didn't really cover all the steps. And we're going to use this as an example. I've sanded it real well. It's good. I take it outside. With the next step, I've held it in my hands when I've worked on it. What's on your hands? Have you ever thought about that? There's oil, body oils, and again, we're trying to control the oils very heavily in the air that comes through the paint. We need to be careful also on the part with the oils from our skins or anything that get on, because they can have an effect. So a lot of times what you'll see people do, depending whether you're using a reducer or a thinner, they'll take a clean rag, lint-free, put a dab on it, and then wipe over all the surfaces that are going to be painted. What that does is it cuts through any grease or oils that are on the surface. It evaporates very quickly, so there's no residue left. Once you've done that, then you'll pull out your tack cloth and go over the surface. And even during that process, you need to watch how you're holding the part, because wherever you're holding it, you could possibly get your oils on it again. So, like with this, if I was using it with a tack cloth, if I didn't use those little surgical glove types, I would grab it from the bottom and then wipe everything down. I would not touch the surface, or if I did touch the surface, I would hold this first, wipe this down as best I could, and then I would try to hold as little a spot as I could, then take it over and wipe the outside down. Since we're talking about the parts, we're going to go ahead and talk about placement and spraying. You may think, well, I got the part, I can spray it, set it down, or, it's not a big deal. Actually, it is a fairly big deal. What surface you paint, how you paint it from beginning to end makes a difference. And I'm just going to use this as an example. In this part, let's say you took and you painted this surface first, okay? Got it all nice and coated. Well, You still have this side to do. What are you going to do? You're kind of stuck. You'd have to sit it down and paint. What's going to happen to this surface? You've just destroyed it. Whereas if you paint this side first, okay, and in that, what I did is I laid it on my porch because, one, I didn't want to hold it with my hands and have the oil. So I laid it on the porch railing, went through and did my spraying. Once it was dry, and I was done with all the parts, because I'm not just spraying this part alone and then going to the next part and spraying all of it and stopping. I'm putting a layer down on this, going to the next piece, putting a layer down on it, and so on, and then coming down back to this, putting a little bit of a heavier layer on this, again, down through the line. It has two effects. It allows the primer to tack up a little bit and kind of dry just a smidge between the times that you put the next layer on. And by the time that you get to that final layer, you spray it on and you've got good coverage. You go to the next pieces and work on those to get the final coverage. By the time you come back, this one is pretty close to being dry. So it has that advantage. And sometimes if you have to, wait just a smidge longer. Even if you have to, stand around. Because when you turn this over, and when I did, these surfaces are going to sit down. If they are wet, you're going to have some defects in the paint. So a little bit of time does help. So we've covered this. Let's look at the body of the Featherweight. Again, how you paint it makes a difference. And believe it or not, even how you hold it makes a difference. Yes, you can put the plate on, put a magnet, put it on a dolly or whatever. But if you have it like this or like this, especially if you're using one of these bigger guns, what are the contortions that you're going to have to put your body in to get an even coverage? It's not going to be comfortable, and I would pretty well guarantee you're not going to get even coverage. So what I do, and what I did with this, you can see I've got my hand. I've got a good grip on it right inside. I don't recommend doing this if you're using one of the bigger guns because you have such a wide cone of spray, you're going to spray your arm. So it's if you're doing that, one of two things. Put rubber gloves on and make sure your forearm is covered so you don't get overspray on it, or use another method. This is the best, and that's one other reason that I choose the airbrush. So we're going to go through this just a little bit. I will start with this area here first. I will come down, hold it up. Regrettably, this area I can't come in totally straight on the surface. So I've got it out. I'm still going to be 90 degrees perpendicular, but I will come in at an angle, pull back, and lay my small coat down. And when I get here, I will take my brush over. Same thing when I'm doing this side. You'll see me start my spray pattern, and I may come over and come off. Same thing. I will not, while I'm painting this area, I'm not concentrating on covering this. I'll get to that after. And then I'll do the body on the head, do around, the surface here, I'll hold it up, spray it. Same thing with the edges. It's just a little bit of planning on how you're going to apply the paint makes a big difference in the quality of your finish. That will help with the painting. Another thing, when I went through and painted all the parts, I had about that much mixed primer and reducer in this jar. That was enough to cover all those pieces, as you can see, with a nice even coat. You don't need to use a lot of paint, okay? You want a thin, uniform coverage. And I'll give you an example of that. In automotive paint, we would have a body side molding that we made. Well, it would have to be painted and then shipped to the manufacturer, and on the assembly line they'd pick the part up, put it on the car. So there were a lot of steps that had to be right in there. The part would go through the paint line, cleaned, base coat, a primer applied, base coat, clear coat, baking oven, then come out and be inspected and packed and shipped. During that process, though, quality control at a certain interval would come down, take apart, go back to wherever they were doing their work. They would have a special electronic device hooked to the computer. They would lay down up on top of it, and it would tell them what the color was. And why is that important? Well, let's say you've painted emerald green on your body side molding, and it's a shade off. Well, they go down, pick up the body side molding, put it on the car. They've got the accurate emerald green. Yours is off a little bit. It's going to be noticeable. So they're going to run the car through the line, assemble the rest of it, put it off to the side. Then they're going to have somebody come along, take that body side molding off, put a new one on, and then put it back into service for delivery. Guess who pays for that? The company that made the body side molding. So it's a pretty good incentive to make sure it's done right. Plus you get demerits or points for a low quality product. So it's pretty important. Also, they would take a cross section. They would cut a piece out of the part, use a microscope hooked to a computer where they could see it, and it would actually measure the thickness of the primer, thickness of the base coat, and the thickness of the clear coat. And there were specs involved as to what each one could be, from minimum to maximum, and they had to be within that tolerance range. So, this is just the same thing, maybe not monitored as closely, but you want as good a look as what they have. I'm trying to think, because with the first run I did pretty good, and I'm just trying to run through my memory and make sure I covered everything. Thank you, Jenny. What we're going to cover is the mask. Whoop. Okay? When you buy a mask, don't go to Home Depot or Lowe's or any box store and buy the mask. And the reason I say that, how valuable is your health? Do you place a good value on it? If you do, you're going to buy good equipment that protects you. They may not be as cheap as the other, but they're worth it. And, the filters, you need to make sure that the filters are appropriate for what you're doing. Because there are dust filters that they have. They have multiple different filters for different applications. And if you use the wrong one, it's not working to the full potential and giving you the most amount of safety that should be there. On top of that, with these filters, I've got it in a bag that's airtight. These filters generally come in a little aluminum foil pack or so. You rip it open, you put it on your mask. Well, Once you take them out of that aluminum pack, there's a shelf life on these filters. They do degrade over time. Putting it in a bag helps limit the air exposure. So if you see a body man, they pull out their mask and it's in a bag, open the bag and put it on, that's the reason. So if you leave it out, your mask will degrade quicker. Your filters on your mask will degrade quicker. Also, you have to be careful about how it fits to your face. There are different sizes of masks. One size does not fit all. You want to make sure you get the right size. The reason for that is, let's say you have the wrong size. The mask isn't tight up against your nose or some other area. Are you getting the most efficiency out of it? You're going to have some of that particulate coming in as you breathe. So you've reduced the efficiency of the mask. One thing that I have to admit that I'm not as fastidious on as I probably should be is my beard. My beard can reduce the efficiency of the mask because of the air coming through. Have you ever wondered why the Army, they can have a mustache as long as it's in reg, but you don't see them with beards? There's a reason for that, not just aesthetics. When you're trained, you will have your protective mask, gas mask, whichever term you want to use, on your side. They go so far when you're in training, and even after when you're in the service, they will time how fast you can take that mask out, put it on properly, and go through the clearing and check stage. Why is that important? Well, depending on what agent is used, you've got a very limited amount of time to get that mask on and you protected, because on some of these, agent amount the size of the head of a pin is enough to kill you. So it's taken very seriously for good reason. This should be taken just as seriously for your health. Some of the products we use, base coat, primer, generally they're not as toxic. You will see a lot of bodymen. Some of them won't even wear a mask when they're priming. Is it the best idea? Not really. Some of the old timers do it, and some people still do it. And they used to not use masks as much. When they painted in the 60s and 70s, they would paint lacquer, especially on show cars, because boy, did that have a deep shine. That was more gorgeous than probably anything we've got today. The only problem with, after some years, that paint would start crazing and cracking, so it didn't have the durability. Had the looks, but not the durability. Once we came through painting processes and we got to base coat, clear coat, urethane based, and again, I'm going to tell you up front, I'm not an expert in this. This isn't my field of expertise. Mine is production. But I do have knowledge from experience from a master auto body tech, from paint line production and interaction with them. But now I've got to think where I was going. I went off track and chased a squirrel. We were talking about safety and paints. When we got to the base coat, clear coat, urethane, and especially with the clear coat with a catalyst, which is basically a fancy term for a hardening agent, the clear coat will dry quicker. It will be harder, more durable than a clear coat that's an enamel base. It will take longer to dry, won't be as durable as a clear coat that has a hardening agent in it. The only downside with that is that the clear coat that I'm using has a hardener in it. And for all the benefits that you have, there is a drawback. It is much more hazardous to your health. As a matter of fact, when I was working with Freddie, they were in the process of switching over to the base coat, clear coat, because that's what the manufacturers use. So in the repair process, they were trying to keep the same quality. And that was a long time ago, trust me. It went so far as he would use one of these when he was applying primer and sometimes the base coat. But the minute that he stepped over and mixed his clear coat and was getting ready to spray it, he would pull out a fresh air system. And there are different types, but his type was one that he would pull over his head. It was a hood. He had a little drawstring. He'd close it up and cinch it. And on the back, it had a little hose. And that hose would go to a little air pump. And that air pump would be placed in an area where there was fresh air. And it would suck the air in and feed it into his helmet, and he would paint. Once the paint was applied, then he would come out to a clear area. He would still not stay in the area that he painted until the fumes had fully dissipated and the material had dried more. So Freddie and I, we're pretty good friends, and I was a little bit more of a card back then, I guess you could say. My wife would call it something different, but I'm going to go with that. He had his fresh air pump below my table, my bench, in my small engine area. And we'd go get lunch down at Kilkenny's, a little store. And one of my favorites was when they would serve Polish kielbasa, red cabbage, baked, where they cut the potatoes up, bake them, and season them, and put them in the tray, and then you get a dessert. Oh, that was good. Had an unintended side effect with me, but it was worth it. And some of the time, when Freddie was painting, and it just happened that, the timing was good, I'd walk over by his air pump, and I'd relieve myself. Well, you just picture what happened with that, with what I described. All of that got sucked into the air pump and fed into his helmet or hood. And in the middle of the process of applying the clear coat, you just don't want to leave. You're pretty much locked into finishing the area. So he'd finish his clear coat, and he would come out into my area, and he would explain to me in terms that would have made a sailor blush that was not okay. Did it stop me? Nah. It did stop me when he moved the pump from my area to a different area.
Speaking in tongues.
No, he didn't speak in tongues. He was pretty plain spoken with what he said. I think that's enough for today. I hope this was helpful to you, and I'll see you on the next one where we may do another video. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.